younger Mark Walker built a PC specifically to play Stalker Shadow of Chernobyl back in 2007. He didn't expect that almost 20 years later, he'd be playing it on a handheld device that was universally seen as incredibly weak. He also didn't expect to be living in a world that more closely resembled the one depicted within the Stalker universe. GSC Game World, a Ukrainian dev team, created this, what at the time and probably now I still class as a bit of a masterpiece, a first-person survival shooter with an open world and a dynamic AI system, the likes of which I'd never seen before, and that still amazingly holds up to this day. Well, I was equally surprised and delighted to see it. So let's go over Shadow of Chernobyl, Clear Sky, and Call of Pripyat, which combined make the Stalker Legends of the Zone trilogy. Is the Switch Zone the perfect home for them, or are they a radioactive mess? Well, my name's Mark Walker. Welcome back to SwitchUp. Now let's find out. So let's first talk about performance. Now, all three games target 30 frames per second. Shadow of Chernobyl runs almost flawlessly. In fact, the performance surprised me. I know these are very old games, but they still look really nice. I remember at the time the lighting engine was almost revolutionary. You'd have people around a campfire and you'd see their shadows flickering against a wall. And although the character models even then were a little clunky, from the first person perspective, the world looked quite lovely. The Switch versions of these games do feature full gyroscopic control. However, there's a bit of an issue at the moment. That only really works when you're playing in handheld mode. The reason being, when you're playing it docked, if you can get it to work at all, you'll find that the left joycon is used to aim rather than the right, which in a first-person shooter just feels terrible. Still, having spoken to the developers, they weren't actually aware of that, so that should be getting patched pretty soon. You can tweak the sensitivities. This works in both docked or handheld modes. You can also set that gyro to be only when you're aiming down the sights. Why every first-person shooter on Switch doesn't include this, I just don't understand. Now, as long as you're playing in handheld, it makes taking sniper shots or aiming down those sights so much easier. And it tells me straight off the bat that the studio thought about how it should play on the Nintendo Switch. Even though that's not quite working how they'd like it at the moment, it's good to see. Visually, the games do still hold up for the most part. Of the three titles, ironically, Shadows of Chernobyl, probably through its level design, takes maybe second place in the visual front, and then Clear Skies, I think, looks the best, probably because it's much lighter and you see a lot more of those dynamic shadows from the sunlight. Still, there are some texture issues here and there and a few little quirks I noticed when you're spinning the camera. There can be some slight glitches, but nothing major. And the various different weather effects and the effects given off by the anomalies, they hold up nicely. There is some destructibility here. You can destroy things like crates, but it's the world design and the horrible creatures you come across that are a standout. Quite an intricately designed place, lots of little nooks and crannies to find hidden items, and it has been a blast to rediscover. Shadows have remained, the lighting's all intact. It's a similar story in handheld mode as well across the games, but as I say, gyro actually works properly when you're playing in handheld. There is a slight resolution drop in some situations, but overall it's a pretty good showing for the three titles. The audio has carried across reasonably well. While most of the characters are voice acted, even non-voiced characters will be speaking lines of dialogue in their native tongue, but at other times you're just simply reading text on screen. On that note, I didn't have any issues reading the texts. It's not too small. It's a little more wooden than I remember it, but there's also some great ambient sound, like the aforementioned guitar players around a campfire, or the howls of horrible monstrosities just out of sight. Now, along with that, some of the clunkiness carries over as well. When you're stalking enemies, no pun intended, when they're alerted, back in the day, they used to make this really strange breathing run sound. You always knew when they were onto your case because they'd just start to pant, and that's still here. But overall, from a visual and an audio standpoint, it's still mightily impressive, and it only gets better with each of the three games. While the visuals show their age, they still do hold up, especially in terms of level design. Across the three games combined, they score 17 out of 20. As for audio, that also scores 17 out of 20. Now, although Stalker Shadow of Chernobyl was the first game to release, Clear Sky is actually a prequel. So if you want to know chronologically which to play first, I guess there's an argument to be made for playing that one. Then Call of Pripyat was a sequel. So Clear Sky was set 1 year before the events of the first game. You control Scar, who's a mercenary who survives an anomaly, and he finds himself rescued by a group called Clear Sky. He's on a mission to stop Strelok, who's planning on reaching the center of the zone. Now, ironically, although it is chronologically the first game, it's going to spoil some of the story sections of Shadows of Chernobyl if you do play it first, or at least it will make them a little less mysterious, because within Shadows of Chernobyl you're playing as a character called the Marked One, who is on a mission to kill Strelok. Now, Call of Pripyat is more standalone. It follows the events of both of those games, where the government has launched an operation called Fairway to try and take back control of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. However, after its failure, you're sent in to find out what happened. If you've never played a Stalker game, then there's a lot here that might well surprise you. Firstly, these aren't just first-person shooters. They're essentially RPGs with first-person shooting mechanics. Take, for example, the weapons. Every gun you pick up has its own unique statistics. It will weigh slightly different to others. It will have different durability. And while you start out with what's essentially a pea shooter, if you spot an enemy or even an ally, and you want to take their gun, or you can go about that in whichever way you want. Shadow of Chernobyl starts you out with a bunch of missions to get you acclimatized to the world. There's the trader down in the basement who'll dish out side quests with an overarching story of trying to find this one particular mysterious figure and essentially kill him. Your reasons for doing so aren't entirely clear until you get further in the game, and its vagueness actually worked well in its favor. The same goes for the gameplay design. There's a real freedom here, even down to the very first mission, giving you the choice of going stealthily or having a group join you and going in all guns blazing. The thing about Stalker is, unlike so many games today where it says your choices matter, Stalker made it abundantly clear that it didn't care about your quest lines. If you did something stupid, you could get your entire quest giver crew killed. Now, I'd completely forgotten that, and I was wandering around the zone, just reminiscing with some of those mutant pig creatures, when a group of roaming rogues had spotted me and I didn't realise. I then headed back to my main camp, was going about my business, selling items, trading, the usual RPG fare, when I heard gunfire outside. By the time I got up there, most of my allies were dead, just strewn about, and a seriously heavily armed militia were making their way in. Now, you can save whenever you want. It's one of those games. You can quick load. It doesn't punish you for saving when you're in combat. So you've got a lot of choice when it comes to what you do and how you let things play out. I decided to see where it would go, honestly. And after about a 15-minute gunfight, found myself cowering in the loft of one of the buildings. Everyone else was dead. All of the quest givers had long since perished, and I made one final foray, which ended in my demise. Upon a quick load, I did things differently, but the thought of what had just occurred, it leaves something in your memory, and that's what I remember about Stalker. It's that feeling that, yeah, your choices genuinely might make a big difference to the way things play out, and as a result, you end up being far more cautious and careful, and it in turn makes the world so much more immersive. Now, the zone is filled with many side quests as well, and a bunch of lore for you to discover. You might come across someone injured and they'll beg you for a med kit, and well, I'm sure after what I've just said, there are at least 3 different ways you can approach that situation, and it's up to you. The anomalies around the zone often hide various artifacts. These grant your character certain power-ups and boosts, but the weapons are the main way that you'll improve yourself. When you find your first weapon with a scope, or early on if you look around, one with a silencer, they just increase your avenues for tackling different situations. While the first of the 3 was definitely my favourite, the 2 other games also offer quite a bit of variety. You'll find numerous different missions and quite unexpected ones. If you've played the more modern Metro games, you can definitely see how they took inspiration, and I think even some of the team may have worked on those. There's a DNA that's similar there, while Metro took things on a slightly more linear path, well, at least until some of its later games. So to talk about the survival mechanics of these games then, the later titles actually had things like anomalies or radioactive events take place every now and then, and you literally have to seek shelter underground. Also, you have to manage your stamina, the weight of your inventory, as if you're overburdened, you'll find yourself getting out of breath very quickly. But you've got things like a light meter to show how visible you are, as well as a sound meter, so that emphasis on stealth is quite prevalent throughout all of the games. And you'll always have a bit of an ear on your Geiger counter to make sure you're not too close to radioactive anomalies, as if you find yourself irradiated, your health will be slowly dropping in the background, and if you ignore it, it's at your peril because you'll find yourself just falling down dead. The developers had worked hard to make the zone a living place, so that also applied to the various creatures. You might see them attacking each other or chasing one of your enemies. It's something I have spoken of in other titles, and I always like to see it, and just adds to the flavour. Now, control-wise, I have mentioned the gyro, but you can also crouch, creep around. Enemies can be completely unaware of your presence, but there are a few nice little mechanics, like there's a counter that will show you how many active enemies are in your area. I'm amazed more games haven't done this since. There can be a real sense of fear as you see that number tick up, and likewise as you're picking enemies off and it gradually drops, the inverse emotions play out. If the idea then of an open world radioactive wasteland first person RPG tickles your fancy, then do not sleep on these. If you've played them previously, it's been fantastic revisiting them, and they're surprisingly fresh despite the almost 2 decades gap. Gameplay is still top of its genre. It scores 19 out of 20. If gyro was working properly, controls would be an easy 18 out of 20. Unfortunately, it's not quite working perfectly outside of handheld mode, but with the Pro controller are still very good. They score 17 out of 20. The Stalker games are all excellent. The fact that you can buy them individually is definitely welcome, and they are individual app icons on your Switch, something I always like to see. But the Legends of the Zone Trilogy, which includes all 3 together, is going to cost you £32.99 or your regional equivalent, or as I say, you can buy these separately. They're between 5 and 7 gigs each, but absolutely essential if you've not played them before. The value scores 18 out of 20. The Stalker bundle is a pleasant surprise. It's held up exceptionally well as far as gameplay goes, and these ports have clearly had some TLC put into them, even if they're not completely perfect. If you've not played this series before, or you're a fan of the Metro series, I can guarantee you'll enjoy these. They get a SwitchUp score of 88%. They just need to sort out that gyro. I have sent them an email today. Thanks to our Patreons, our members, all of you that enjoy the content, and as always, for all things Switch, all the time, keep your Switch up. Cheers, guys. See ya!